In this tutorial video, I'm going to show you how to do the different techniques on your technique chart. The first thing I want to go over though is the materials you're going to need. Along with your watercolor set, you're going to need a round brush, and you're also going to need a flat brush. And with your water container, you want to make sure that you have a division between this side being your clean water and the other side will be dirty water. That way, especially when you're trying to mix up yellow or light colored paints, you won't contaminate the pigment and you'll still get nice colors. Also, with this tutorial video, you're going to need a straw and a Q-tip. We're going to be applying salt, so table salt. We'll be using on one technique, and I have a little cup of rubbing alcohol here that we'll be using for another technique. To do masking, we'll be using rubber cement, and I've actually already applied rubber cement to this area here so we can start drying to where we can apply a wash of color over it, because rubber cement is used to mask off areas. So to show you kind of all the overview of what we need, those are the different things we're going to be needing for the technique chart today. So to get started, I'm going to start out with glazing. Now, glazing is another one of those things where you need to have things dry before you put another layer on top. So I'm going to add water to my yellow, and I'm going to, with my round brush, I'm going to make one line of yellow like so. Clean out my brush, and I've got a paper towel over to the side to dry my brush off as well. Then I'm going to add water to my red, and I'm going to make a line of red. Cleaning out the brush again. Then I'm going to pick up some blue and do a line of blue. Now I've got the three primary colors here, and what will happen is once that's totally dry, I will do 3 more lines that will show how glazing can make secondary colors by overlapping those primary colors. So I'm going to let that dry there. The next thing I'm going to do is dry brush that's up here in the corner. With dry brush, I'm going to be using my my flat brush, and I'm going to be basically picking up, adding water, and picking up pigment. But before I brush, I'm actually going to take my paper towel over here, and I'm going to rub some of that paint off of my brush, because I want to just lightly apply the color onto the paper where the white of the paper is still coming through. So it is true a dry brush technique here. Okay? So the next thing I'm going to do is a flat wash. Now, flat wash, we want to load up the brush, and I'm going to actually take some magenta. I'm adding some water to my watercolor here, and down here in this lower corner, I'm going to apply, and I'm going to do a flat wash, and I may have to pick up some more paint because I'm just going to fill in that area with my color, and I want to make sure that the color is flat. There's not a whole lot of change in the values. Got a little bit of a, there we go. Got a little piece of brush there that's coming out. So I'm going to let that sit there and dry, because once it dries, we'll go back and we'll do the splatter technique. So after I do the flat wash, I'm going to do a graded wash, and just like we have graded lead pencils, when we're talking about a graded wash in watercolor, we're going to have lighter values. So I'm going to load up my brush, And at the top of this space, I'm going to put a line of blue paint there. And then I'm going to just dip my brush in my water, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to do another line of blue, and I'm leaving a little bit of space so we can see the difference. I'm going to put my brush in the water again, rubbing the excess off to the side, and I'm going to come back and I'm doing another line, and then I could do it until I clean out my brush, and that's a graded wash. Now the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take clean water, still using the flat brush on all this right now, and I'm going to wet my brush and I'm going to wet my paper. Where it says wet on wet, I'm going to go in and I'm wetting that paper. Now I'm going to pick up some watercolor in my brush, and I'm going to go across and see it just kind of flow with the water. And let it move. I'm just putting a little bit of blue in there so you can see how it can move. And as we're working, that may move around and do some more. Now the next area we're going to do is blotting. Now with the blotting technique, we're going to be using a paper towel to pick up some of our watercolor as we're painting. So I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to do a flat wash of blue in the area where it says blotting and straw. And I'm going to paint this whole area. And while it's still wet, I'm going to take my paper towel and I'm going to blot and pick some of that paint up. So I'm lifting or blotting some of that paint up to give a textured effect. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move up here to Sgraffito. Sgraffito is one of those techniques that's used in watercolor and in ceramics and in other types of art. But it's where you scratch into the surface. So I have this Sgraffito tool. This is a tool I forgot to show you at the beginning. But it has a very sharp point on it, and what you're going to do is you're going to just go in and scratch that watercolor paper. Now we're using heavy watercolor paper. You couldn't do this with thin copy paper, it'd just tear it. You wouldn't be able to, but with this heavy watercolor paper, Sgraffito is a really good technique that allows you to add texture. So once you've scratched the surface, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to go back and you're going to add your paint. And the paint will puddle in areas that have the scratches in it. So I'm mixing up some brown right here. And I'm going to do a wash. And you can see how that's gone in, and where I've scratched, you see the pigment has puddled in those areas. The next technique we're going to do is we're going to move over here to rubbing alcohol. So I'm going to put in some color here. I'm going to do a flat wash, and you have to do this while it's still really wet. So I'm going to add my color, and I'm going to take my Q-tip. I'm going to dip it into my rubbing alcohol, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to add it, and you can see how it's creating a resist, like so. The next that I'm going to do is I'm going to do salt, and I'm going to, there again, it has to be wet. I'm going to add the paint to the area, and while this is still really wet, I'm going to go back and I'm going to put regular table salt on top of it, just a pinch. And as that salt dries, it's pulling that pigment. Once it's completely dried, we'll be able to knock away the salt, and we'll be left with a pitted texture on that. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here and we're going to do splatter. So I'm using that flat brush again. And I'm going to mix up so it shows. I'm going to splatter some black watercolor. So I'm going to take black and I'm going to mix it up where it's fairly thick. But I'm going to be taking that brush on the side and taking my finger and flicking it. Might have to load up the brush again. But we're getting that splatter effect there. Now in the area where we have the rubber cement, I'm going to go in and we're just going to paint a flat wash over that. And you can see it's resisting it. And once that's completely dried, we'll be able to roll that rubber cement up in that area. Now we've got two areas other than the complementary color mixing, and there's a separate video for the complementary color mixing that you'll need to watch. But we have the straw down here and the glazing. So I'm going to try to do both of those really quick. This one's almost dried. This has still got some wet spots, but I think we'll be able to do it. I'm going to take black and I'm going to put a puddle of black paint down here in a corner. I'm going to puddle it up. And then I'm going to take my straw and I'm going to blow it. And you see I've moved that up the side. I'd like it to go a little bit over, but it's one of those things that it's not an exact science to get it where you need it to be. But you get the idea. You're moving watercolor with the straw. And then finally with glazing, I'm going to clean out this round brush I was using. Don't want that black paint in my brush when I do the glazing part. I'm going to start back and I'm going to do where I did horizontal lines. This time around I'm doing vertical lines. So I'm going to do a line of yellow. I'm going to clean out my brush. I'm going to do a line of red. And then I'm going to do a line of blue. and that's going to give you a sense of, see, we got a little bit of green happening here. So that concludes all those different techniques that we're going to be doing with your watercolor chart, with the exception of the complementary color mixing.